speed, as they say. Hi, I'm Robert Harley, editor of the Absolute Sound magazine, and in this video I'm going to take you on a tour of my listening room. Actually, we're going to shoot two videos, one of the actual listening room itself, which was custom designed and built from the ground up, and then the second companion video will take you through all the equipment that's in the room. So in this video about the room, I'll tell you about its design, construction, how it performs, and give you a little tutorial on room acoustics. And toward the end of the video, I'll share with you some techniques that you can use to improve the sound of any listening room. So about 6 years ago, I decided to move back to New Mexico and build a house with a custom listening room. And I had built two houses before, both with custom listening rooms. But this room I wanted to be much more special and higher performance. This is my last house, so I wanted to have a room that was not only good sounding so I could enjoy music, but also to create a platform that was as neutral as possible so that I could review equipment and hear more precisely what the equipment was doing without the effects of the room. So the first consideration when planning a listening room is the dimensional ratios. And that's the ratio of the length to the width to the height. And that's a really crucial thing because if you have good dimensional ratios, it's fairly easy to get good sound, good linear bass. If you have poor dimensional ratios, you can move the speakers and move them for hours and hours and never find a place where the speakers really gel. You're constantly fighting the room. So the reason dimensional ratios are so important is that the air in a room will resonate at a natural frequency. So think of blowing air in a bottle and you hear that tone that it produces. And if you put some water in the bottle, it would produce a higher pitched tone. So there's a set of resonant frequencies on the length, there's another set of resonant frequencies on the width, and a third set on the height. And the idea is to spread those resonance modes out evenly over the audio spectrum so they don't pile up all at a certain frequency. And there are online calculators that you can use where you just plug in the dimensional ratios and it does all this plotting for you. The first time I ever did this was in 1981. I was designing and building a recording studio. And I had a calculator, a hand calculator, and it was very, very tedious. And now you can just go online. There's a website called AMROC, A-M-R-O-C, and it does a complete analysis of any set of dimensional ratios. So that was really invaluable in choosing the dimensional ratios. So this room is 27 feet long, 17 feet wide, with an 11-foot ceiling. And that's not the absolute perfect ratio, but it comes pretty close. And with dimensional ratios, it's not a case where if you're a little bit off, the room doesn't work well. There's a whole spectrum of ratios that work really well. A thing called the bolt area, where if you get anywhere in this range of ratios, you can get good sound. So that was the first consideration. The second consideration was the wall construction. And there are a lot of different ways to build a wall. And I chose a technique created by Art Noxon at Acoustic Sciences Corporation. And Art Noxon is the inventor of the tube trap, probably the most famous audiophile room treatment. And he's a physicist and acoustician. And he came up with this wall construction method that after researching it, I decided this was the way to go. And in this system, the studs are covered with a resilient channel. like this, and it attaches to the studs, and then the sheetrock goes on top of this. So the sheetrock is never in contact with the studs. And then this resilient channel is used in apartment buildings to increase the isolation. It's fairly common. But this is specially modified resilient channel that has a layer of viscoelastic damping material on it. This attaches to the stud with a little pad of viscoelastic material that Acoustic Sciences provides. Acoustic Sciences will provide the whole kit for doing this wall construction technique. You can tell them how big your room is, and they'll specify all the materials that you need, which is how I did it with them. And so you put a layer of sheetrock on the resilient channel, and then you put more of this damping material on the sheetrock, the 4x4 squares, and you put strips all around where the doors are and windows and all the drywall seams. And then you put a second layer of sheetrock on top of it. So the sheetrock never touches the studs, except it's firmly except at the perimeters. And so what this does is when sound strikes the wall, the energy isn't transmitted into the wall. The wall flexes a little bit. It's a constrained layer damping system. So that energy gets dissipated as heat, and it's not put into the wall structure. And this has three beneficial effects. The first is it prevents something called wall shudder. So when bass strikes a wall, it puts that wall into motion. It turns the acoustic energy into vibrational motion. Then the bass transient stops, and the wall continues to move a little bit. And it converts that back into acoustic energy after the event has happened, after the acoustic event has happened. And so Art Noxon termed this phenomenon wall shudder. And that colors the sound in several ways, both in the time domain, because the wall is producing sound after the transient is stopped. And it doesn't take much wall movement to produce an audible effect, because the acoustic output of a surface is determined by its excursion, how much it moves, and also by the surface area. So even though the wall doesn't move much, the surface area is huge. So this system damps that energy so it isn't put into the wall and then released later in time. And in addition to coloring the sound in the time domain, it also affects the frequency domain, because the wall is going to have a natural resonant frequency where it's going to produce more energy than at other frequencies. So that's this technique. Oh, by the way, it's called the isowall technique. And he invented it maybe 30 years ago. It's been used in recording studios and a lot of rooms. So it's a well-researched and proven technique. So the other good effect of the isowall technique is the wall acts as a big bass absorber through diaphragmatic action. So the wall moves a little bit, and it converts some of that energy, that bass energy, and it dissipates it as heat in the viscoelastic material that's between the layers of sheetrock. And bass absorption is a big problem in listening rooms. Usually, in the vast majority of listening rooms, there's not enough bass absorption. It's hard to get bass absorption. You need large bass absorbers, and you want to balance bass absorption with mid-range and treble absorption so you get a smooth response. So the isowall technique, the entire wall and ceiling act as a bass trap. So you need very little bass absorption, if any, in the room in terms of surface treatments. And the third beneficial effect is that it isolates the listening room from the rest of the house. So one of my goals for this room was to have be able to play any music at any listening level at any hour without disturbing anybody else in the house. And that's a huge challenge, to isolate a room like that, where you can have very high sound pressure levels inside the room but not hear it. So it takes a lot of careful design, and you can't cut corners because any little mistake or if you miss any detail, it can compromise the isolation factor. So I ended up doing the entire installation myself of all this acoustics. It's a fairly elaborate thing. I bit off more than I could chew, actually. It ended up being a big job. I did everything except hang the sheetrock, but I wanted to make sure it was done right. So another aspect of the room that falls into the isolation domain is the door to the rest of the house. And this is a really important element of isolating the listening room from the rest of the house. You can build a wall with tremendous isolation, but it can be compromised if the door is leaky. And it requires a door of this magnitude. It's got these roller bearing hinges. It weighs 230 pounds. It has a magnetically activated seal at the bottom. So when you close the door, a seal comes down to close it. There's a lot of acoustic caulking around the door when it was framed. So you can have very high sound pressure level in here, and you walk out the door and close the door, and it sounds like there's a transistor radio on. It's really effective, but it takes a lot of effort to make sure that there are no compromises. And then the door has 3 latches, so it makes a tight seal all along the door, because even the tiniest crack lets a lot of sound through. And here is the magnetically activated seal that drops down, because you can't have any gaps in the wall. And another goal for this room was to have easy access for moving equipment in and out. So I've been reviewing high-end audio full-time for 34 years, and for all that time, I've dragged huge speakers through the front door of a house and maneuvered it through the house into the listening room. And so in this room, I've got a side door to a 3-car garage, and a third of the garage is dedicated to box storage and equipment staging. So right outside that door, I've got crates where speakers come in, and it's really easy to move big speakers in and out. The last speakers I had in here, my reference speaker is the Wilson Chronosonic XVX, and it weighs 685 pounds each. And then the pair of subwoofers are 640 pounds each. So that was another design goal for the room, is to make it easy to get equipment in and out. Another element of the ISO wall technique is to damp all the studs before you even start putting the resilient channel in. And this involves a half-inch piece of plywood, 5 inches wide, that you attach to the side of every stud with 2 strips of viscoelastic damping material between the stud and the plywood. So you apply these strips of viscoelastic damping material to the 5.5 inch wide piece of plywood and screw it to the side of the stud. And what this does is it damps the vibration in the wall. And when I saw the drawing for how it was done, I thought that's going to be a huge amount of work to cut all these strips of plywood, put the damping material, screw it to every single stud in the room. So I went to Lowe's and bought 1 sheet of plywood and had the guy Lowe's rip it into 5.5 inch pieces, brought it back to the listening room, and did an experiment where I hit the stud with a hammer and recorded it on my phone, and you can hear the result here. And then I applied the stud damper and did the same experiment. And as you can hear, without the stud damper, the stud just rings and rings. It stores that energy and releases that energy for a long time. But when you put that stud damper in, that vibrational energy is converted into a little small amount of heat in the viscoelastic material, and the energy decays instantly. It's a dull thud where it decays instantly. And if you multiply that by every stud in the room, you can see how it would have an effect. And in fact, between the stud damper viscoelastic material and the viscoelastic material between the layers of sheetrock, there's probably 250 or 300 pounds of this damping material built into the structure of the wall. So after I did that experiment, I went back to Lowe's and brought some eye protection goggles and hearing protection and loaded up a cart. And the guy and I just ripped sheet after sheet of plywood. And I spent probably about 3 10-hour days just applying the stud dampers. But I figured this is my last listening room and I want to do it right. So I think it was worth it in the end. So building a listening room is a big commitment in time and money and effort, but it really makes a big difference in the performance that you get out of the room. And one of the things, when I first put speakers in here and heard the room for the first time, I was thrilled at the performance. I heard things from an audio system, a lack of distortion that I hadn't heard before. And one of the performance aspects that really surprised me was that the room didn't overload. That is, when there was a big bass transient and a lot of energy, the room could handle it. It didn't seem to compress and get kind of grungy at high levels of low bass. It was like it took a lid off the dynamic range of the music, where you had this huge dynamic range. The bass transient starts with a suddenness, and then it decays very quickly. And you get this really powerful sense of rhythm and tight, punchy bass, which I was thrilled about, that I wasn't really expecting. It really surprised me. All rooms modify the bass response of a loudspeaker, where you get peaks and dips in the response caused by the interaction of the direct sound from the speakers and the reflected sound from the room. So having a good room minimizes that, and so every bass note is about the same volume. So if you have a descending bass line, you hear each note at the same volume. Certain notes don't stick out as being louder, and you don't have certain notes where you don't hear it as well. And in fact, a loudspeaker designer was here in my room setting up his one of his top models, and after the setup was done, he says, "That's the most linear bass I've ever heard from that speaker," which was a real compliment coming from the designer. So when manufacturers come here and set up their loudspeakers, they're thrilled by the performance of the room. So that was the goal, is to have the room impose as little sonic signature as possible so that I can more accurately hear what the components under review are doing. And it really achieved that goal that I'm happy about. So once the room is designed and built, there's the entirely separate question of surface acoustics. And I'm going to take you through all the surface acoustic products in my listening room, how I chose them, and why they're placed where they are. And how I ended up choosing this package was I lived in a rental house for about 15 months while this house was being built, and had an opportunity to try a lot of different acoustic products. So this package that I have in here is from a company called Acoustic Geometry, and they have a complete package as well as a design service. So I got their Pro Pack 10 is called, which is a combination of bass absorbers, diffusers, and mid to high frequency absorbers. And I experimented with them in a bare bones listening room. It was a completely untreated room. And I brought each of these products in one at a time and evaluated them to decide on what products I was going to use in my reference listening room on a permanent basis. So that's how I chose the Acoustic Geometry products. So the first one we'll talk about is it's called the corner absorber. And it's a bass absorber, and it's most effectively used in the corners behind the loudspeakers, because the bass from the loudspeaker diffracts around the cabinet, comes back into the corner, and is reflected back into the room. and that reflected energy combines with the direct sound from the speaker. And at some frequencies it combines constructively, where the peaks of the waves coincide, and you get a peak at that frequency. And at some frequencies they combine destructively, where one's at a peak and the other wave is at a trough, and they cancel each other, and you get a dip at that frequency. So by absorbing this rear wave from the speaker, you reduce that effect. So this has a rubber membrane on the back of the absorber that when it's placed close to the wall, that's where the pressure is the greatest. And it makes that diaphragm vibrate, and it converts the acoustic energy into mechanical motion that's dissipated in this chamber. So these are very effective. They go very low. It's hard to get very low bass absorption. You need big structures. But I found that these do very well in that regard. And putting some kind of bass absorption in the corner behind a speaker is a huge benefit in getting linear bass. A really important element in getting good sound in a listening room is diffusion. And diffusion is a scattering of sound. So when sound strikes a surface, it can either be absorbed, reflected, or diffused, scattered, or some combination of the three. So what this does is it scatters the sound, and it's positioned on the sidewalls between the speaker and the listening position at exactly the point where the wave reflects from the wall. And you can find that point by taking a hand mirror, having someone sit in the listening seat, move the mirror along the sidewall, and wherever you see the speaker in the mirror from the listening seat, that's the point of visual reflection, and it's also the point of acoustic reflection. So you don't need to treat the whole sidewall, you just need to catch that first reflection point. And that first reflection is really detrimental to the listening experience because the wave reflected from the sidewall is delayed in time, where it combines with the direct sound from the speaker and produces a phenomenon called comb filtering, where you get these very narrow peaks and dips in the frequency response. And also the spectral response is going to be very different. The frequency response from the speaker is very different off-axis, so you get that reflected energy to the listening seat. So by diffusing or absorbing the sidewall reflection, it confers a huge advantage. When I was experimenting with all these acoustic treatments in my temporary listening room, a single pair of these curved diffusers at the first reflection point was absolutely miraculous what it did. The soundstage opened up, and it was less tonally colored. And if there's a single thing you do to your listening room to improve the sound, it's absorbing or diffusing that sidewall reflection. So this product is called a curved diffuser. It comes in different colors. And it also has a membrane on the back for some bass absorption. If it's placed very close to a wall, it gives you some bass absorption. Not nearly as much bass absorption as the dedicated bass absorbers, but it gives some upper bass and lower mid-range absorption, which is helpful to balance out. So a pair of these strategically located on either side of the listening room, symmetrically positioned, really goes a long way to getting good sound from your room. And if this doesn't work in your room or you don't have that ability, even just hanging a rug or a bookcase or anything on that sidewall really makes a big difference. But you definitely don't want to have an untreated sidewall between you and the loudspeakers. Another product that works really well on sidewalls, or actually anywhere, is the tube trap from Acoustic Sciences Corporation, ASC. This is really the granddaddy of acoustic treatments for listening rooms. It's been around for about 40 years. It's proven its effectiveness. And it provides diffusion or absorption. So this button here indicates half of the tube trap is reflective and half is absorbent. So you can turn the trap and dial in the exact amount of diffusion or absorption depending on your listening room. It also provides low bass absorption very effectively. This is called a 16-inch full round, and it comes in half round. It comes in different sizes. You can stack them. And it also is very effective in breaking up standing waves. So standing waves are high and low pressure areas, stationary areas of high and low pressure in a room, and you want to break those up. So having this structure in the room diffuses that energy and scatters it and makes it more random, which is desirable. So tube trap's a great choice. So the third and final element of the acoustic surface treatments in my room is also made by Acoustic Geometry, and it's just a simple mid-range and treble absorber. It just kills flutter echo, which is a repetition if you have untreated parallel surfaces. So it just absorbs that and provides a little high frequency balance to the other absorption. And I've got about 12 of these in the listening room in various places that you can see in the diagram where they're positioned. So these are relatively inexpensive. You can also use these on the sidewall. If you don't go with the curved diffuser, a pair of these on the sidewalls are also effective. Overall in my room, I have 12 of the curved diffusers, 12 of the mid and high frequency absorption panels, and 4 corner absorbers, bass absorbers. And the bass absorbers are in the corners behind the loudspeakers. And the curved diffusers and the mid and high frequency absorption panels are distributed throughout the room. And in one of the comments of my previous video with a manufacturer here, someone commented that my room sounds terrible. And they'd never been to my room, never talked to anybody who'd been in my room. So how did he know my room sounded terrible? Well, he was basing that on the fact that not every square inch is covered with acoustic materials. And the amount of acoustics in here, surface treatments, is just right for the room. And it's a fallacy that you have to cover every square inch of the surface. People figure some acoustic treatment's good, more must be better. And I've talked to so many audiophiles over the years who have built a serious room and way over-treated it. They cover the walls with diffusion, and the ceiling's got diffusion on it. And then they get speakers in there, and the sound is dead and lifeless. And if you overdo a room, over-treat a room, it starts to go downhill. So this amount of surface treatment, I think, is just right for the room. And it's worked out well. The room sounds absolutely fabulous. I've had a number of some of the world's best speaker designers in here setting up their speakers, and universally they've been thrilled with the sound that they get in here. So in the, I think it's the 4th edition of my book, The Complete Guide to High-End Audio, I have a photograph of a listening room where it's completely covered in diffusing surfaces. And I happen to know the person who built the room, and he must have spent $150,000 or $200,000 building this custom room. And he was all excited, and he put speakers in there the first time, and the room sounded terrible. It was over-treated. And he figured some treatment is good, more must be better. So he ended up tearing out all the surface acoustics of the room and replacing it with a completely different system. And that room didn't sound good either. So he ended up on the 3rd iteration before he got it right. So the moral of the story is more isn't necessarily better. The strategic placement, choice of acoustics and placement is more important than just throwing more surface treatments to it. So building this listening room was a big effort in time and expense, and I put a lot into it. But the result is that I have a listening room that sounds fabulous, that I can really enjoy music in to the fullest. But more importantly, I've got a world-class platform for evaluating some of the best hi-fi in the world. Manufacturers can bring their best efforts here and find a platform that's neutral and transparent so that the qualities of their equipment comes through and it's not clouded or masked by colorations of the listening room. It's like a transparent window on what the equipment's doing. And that enables me to better understand exactly what a piece of equipment's doing and describe that in the review and communicate that to the readers of the Absolute Sound. So in the end, it was really worth the effort. So if you're interested in learning more about room acoustics, I have a whole chapter in my book, The Complete Guide to High-End Audio, in a 6th edition now, that goes into room acoustics, and it explains in detail how I designed and built this room. So I hope you'll subscribe to our channel, where we'll have more videos like this. And also, over the next few months, I've got a series of big loudspeakers coming in here with the designers are going to come and set up, where I'm going to do an interview with the designer and talk about the product in the room. So we've got those coming up. And thanks for watching.